So this last panel is all about climate change in the mainstream, and it's basically to do with the fact that often climate change can become a bit of a side interest, or you can get an hour in geography in school once a month sort of thing. It's not a main topic for a lot of people, and we want to talk today about how it can be part of your life and how we can be really connected to nature and to changes and to the environment and science and all of that world. So please help me welcome our lovely panelists. So to start off with, guys, I'm going to get you all to introduce yourselves, talk about what you do, what your work is in this space.
Hi guys, my name's Elliot. I am the founder and co-director of a non-profit organisation called Football for Future, where I and we specialise in football and climate action and sustainability. I've got a background in the environmental sciences and social movements, specifically movement building. I've been working in the climate movement for a while, in different ways, in different spaces with a couple of different organisations, which I'm sure many of you have also been associated with, and I am a Brighton fan.
I'll come to you next, Elliot. It'd be great to know a bit more about your work launching and with Football for Future. And I guess, what role do you think football plays and can play in this conversation about climate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'm probably going to try to take you guys on like my own sort of conceptual journey where we'll all sort of, if everything goes according to plan, arrive at the same place, which is in agreement that football is the most exciting cultural phenomenon with the greatest potential, seriously, to drive global climate action. So we need to build the biggest movement that the world has ever seen in order to tackle the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, right? That's why we're all here. And we need to create the biggest movement. What does that mean? To be participating in this movement means that you are in one way, shape or form, you're an activist, right? So then we can dig a little bit deeper and think about what does it mean to be an activist? And we've got a lot of activists here today, right? People look different, we move in different ways, we work in different ways as part of the movement, but also thinking about like our history and our experience working in activism. Like, it's a beautiful thing, like we get amazing communities, we experience a lot of magic when we are on the streets and we're dancing and sharing, etc. But also, if we all think back and like imagine some of the times when we've been in very challenging situations as being activists, right? Maybe we're camping on the streets, skipping school, taking time off work. Maybe we're receiving abuse or holding banners in the pouring rain or the freezing cold. I'm sure a lot of this resonates with you guys a lot. And I've been right there. And I used to wonder like why my mates and my family who understood the climate crisis weren't on the streets with me. You know what I mean? Like I know so many people that understand the extent of the climate and ecological emergency who were not partaking in protests and non-violent direct actions. And it kept me asking the same question over and over again about like how do you increase participation in the climate movement and what does it mean to be an activist? And I think I worked with Extinction Rebellion a lot, and people here would have worked with them too, and Fridays for Future, and these organisations achieved exceptional things in raising our national sort of like critical environmental consciousness. We got the many local governments and our national government to declare climate emergencies. Like this is like phenomenal stuff. We brought a community of people together that are now continuing to work together and take that work forward, not only in the UK but internationally as well. But I felt like there was this barrier between like breaking the echo chamber from there and increasing participation and increasing action. And then it got me reflecting on my own identity as an activist. And when I thought back, my first experience as an activist was actually going on demonstrations to get my club, who lost 6-1 today, Brighton and Hove Albion, planning permission when we didn't have a home. Right, our ownership sold our stadium. It got developed into a retail park, and we were sharing with Gillingham, and then we were playing at a local athletics track, which we were hiring off the local council. And I remember my dad taking me onto the streets, and we were marching, trying to get planning permission, and the rest is history. I'm going to Marseille next week to watch us in the Europa League. We've got a state-of-the-art stadium. But football fans are, great activists. A couple of years ago, some of you might recall when the European Super League was announced, and all of the biggest brands in world football were being taken to this, out of domestic football. And fans woke up in the morning and they were marching and they were screaming and shouting, and they had banners and placards and they were straight outside their stadiums. And I was like, wow, damn, like I'm super proud of the football community. Look at this, we're all activists. Super cool. And then I wanted to try and take this identity of being a football fan into the climate movement. So I remember going to demos, and one in particular, I wore an old Brighton shirt. And as I was leaving the door, I grabbed a pizza box, and on the back of it with a Sharpie, I wrote "Brighton fans for climate justice." And that weekend, I had so many middle-aged women coming up to me and being like, "Can I take your photo? Because my son thinks it's really, he really, really loves football, but he doesn't think it's cool to care about the planet." And like, I'm not even joking, this happened more than 10 times, like independently, over and over again. And I was like there on the street thinking, wow, it's amazing how you can bring these two identities together. And I had a chat with a woman, a really inspirational woman called Gail Bradbrook, who's one of the founders of XR. And I told her about this, and she was like, yo, that's super cool. Why don't you just like set up a football group? So I set up a group called like XR Football or Football Rebellion, and I coordinated that for a year. And around this time, a report came out that mentioned that by 2050, 25% of professional football teams in men's English football, their stadiums will be flooded on an annual basis by 2050. And there was names like Chelsea, Southampton, Fulham, like loads of big clubs. So we did an action outside a bunch of Barclays branches, because at that time Barclays were the official banking partner of the Premier League, but they were also investing more money into fossil fuel projects than any other European company. So they were like simultaneously sponsoring the Premier League but sponsoring like the destruction of football. So we did these like pop-up games outside Barclays branches in London. And we had like one of the teams was like all corporates and shirts and stuff. It was kind of like theatre in a way. And the other team, we all had bibs, and we were like a proper football team. And the referee was a banker, and like it was super corrupt. And the goalposts were moving. It was quite funny. But my friends were coming down, and my dad came down. You know what I mean? So like, when you bring football into it, all of a sudden, like my mates who would never come to a demo before, and my old man who would he recycles a bit, but come on, he was coming down. And I was like, yo, this is super cool. Super inspiring. We started getting into like national media. I remember we were in The Guardian, we was in the BBC. People like to talk about football. We're obsessed with it in this country. But then I started getting a couple of players reaching out, and I started getting a couple of clubs getting in touch, and I was like, wow, like I really want to work with these guys, but I can't do that as Extinction Rebellion, like there's no chance. I got to be a bit realistic here. So I set up this like an independent non-profit called Football for Future. I went to the best graphic designer I know, and I said, yo, Tim, make me a logo for this. And I was like, I'll pay you £100. And he's like, I don't want the money, just take me along for the journey. And he's still like a good friend and co-founder now. But we always say at Football for Future, one of our slogans is, nothing is more important than protecting the planet, and no social phenomenon is more powerful than football. Everyone in football, whether you're a broadcaster or a burger van, or whether you're a federation or you're a fan, everybody in this room, everybody in every sector of the world, no matter what you do, you have a unique position of power, a unique position of responsibility, unique skill sets, right? And in football, it's about how can you mobilize this, inspire people and empower people. And football's so unique because it's the most powerful social phenomenon in the world, and you can address this and approach that in different ways. It's this very unique connective tissue that brings people together across socioeconomic divides, nationalities, races, religions, genders, ages. It's really, really amazing. It's super powerful. If we look at broadcasting stats, the last 2 men's World Cups, in the finals, we had more than 3 billion people watching those. 3 billion people. And the game keeps on growing through women's football, but also geographically in different regions of the world. If you think about the most powerful media platforms that exist in the world today, it's not, legacy media organizations like the BBC or the New York Times or Al Jazeera or any of that anymore. It's the social media accounts of these football players and these football brands. So a lot of potential. I mean, in terms of the cultural capital that exists in the game, it's like completely unparalleled. And if you think about it as well, I don't know if I'm sure there are football fans in here. In the last half an hour, I saw an Ajax shirt, I saw a United shirt, I saw a Wolves shirt, I saw an Arsenal shirt. It's like football fans are everywhere. But I can't remember. I just got distracted by telling a little anecdote. But obviously, like, the cultural capital is incredible. And how do we mobilize that? And there's loads of different, like, for good organizations that exist in football around. Like, obviously, Marcus Rashford with his Free School Meals campaign, like, unbelievable. You get policy change. Racial justice, all of these players taking a knee a couple of seasons ago, unbelievable. This is still happening today. They've created amazing noise and conversation around that. Gender equity in football, especially here in the UK at the moment with what's been going on with the Lionesses, is unbelievable. Lots of amazing conversations about gender equity, which spill from the pitch, but also outside, into just like all of these different spaces from pubs to playgrounds. And it's the same with LGBTQ plus conversations in football, but there was just like deafening silence around climate. It's like super interesting, like, why did that exist? And to be able to mobilize climate in football, you need to be able to, like, dig beneath the surface and, like, try to understand what the relationship is between football and climate. So, like, how does climate change impact football, right? How can you make climate change relatable to football fans? Like I said, 25% of stadiums in professional men's football in this country are predicted to be flooded on an annual basis by 2050. It's amazing, great stat. The last Men's World Cup, it was meant to take place in the summer in Qatar, and it got moved to the winter, and major tournaments are being rearranged now. The last African Cup of Nations was rearranged. It was meant to be in the summer in Cameroon. Cameroonian meteorologists recommended that it was played in the winter. The next African Cup of Nations in the Ivory Coast has already been moved because they expect strong monsoons. In the 2020 Japanese Olympics, in the final between the UK women and the Canadian team, kickoff was delayed by 9 hours because of, like, extreme humidity. But it's not just football anyway, it's all sports. But obviously I'm a football nut, so, like, my whole conversation is going to be focused on the beautiful game. But also you can look at, okay, so flip that the other way. How does football have an impact on the planet? And we can use the prism of, like, a match day analogy, right? Super relatable to billions of people around the world. We all go through the same process and rituals, right? So you wake up in the morning, you're putting on your shirt. How many shirts have been released this season? We all know the implications of fast fashion. How you get into the game. About 80%, between 60 and 80% of the football industry's carbon emissions come from transport. So how we travel into the games. Football has a big part to play in driving, climate action and sustainability around the world, and as we all know, travel is a really big part of that. What food is available at the stadiums? Are there vegetarian options or, like, plant-based options? What's it wrapped in, et cetera, et cetera? How are people consuming information as well? So really interesting, and then you can also start to pick out the most interesting and ambitious and progressive sustainability initiatives that already exist in football. Like Forest Green Rovers are an example of a professional club in this country that are certified as carbon zero, carbon neutral by FIFA and by the United Nations. But loads of teams in the Premier League now are recruiting sustainability managers. The Premier League have also got a sustainability manager. It's moving really, really quickly. The Bundesliga, which are the two top leagues in Germany, they're introducing mandatory club licensing criteria from a sustainability perspective, which is also really, really inspiring. And we're seeing more and more players using their platforms to speak up about this issue, which is super important because, these guys are influencers on, like, another level. So my personal opinion is that, look, environmental sustainability is one thing, but climate action is something that's completely different, right? If you've got a club and they're, like, bringing in, like, recycling and all this sort of stuff, that's great, but that's environmental sustainability. And it's not proportionate to the scale of the crisis that we're seeing. You know what I mean? Like, if you're looking at football and it's like, oh yeah, can you audit yourselves and, like, release a strategy that's going to show us how you can reach, zero carbon? We've already got catastrophic warming locked in, right? So if you're going to go carbon zero by 2050, it's not going to save the planet. It's not. If we look at the science, we look at the warming, we look at the ice caps melting, all of these different tipping points and feedback loops which we're going past, a sustainability strategy for a football club isn't going to save us. But football is unique because it is the most powerful social phenomenon in the world. I sound like a broken record. So how can football clubs, players, brands use their platforms to be able to drive radical worldwide awareness and attitude shifts around climate? Because they're not really doing it yet, but they can do, and it's going to start to happen. Over the last few years, we're seeing an exponential growth in the amount of players that are talking about this, brands talking about it, clubs talking about it, and we need to get away from this you got to be perfect to talk about climate or whatever. Like, everybody knows that football's owned by billionaires, oligarchs, etc. You can only earn that much money through usually exploitation of people or or exploitation of the natural world. They're not perfect, they're far from perfect, but they exist. Football exists, and we have to work with them and stop pointing fingers at them. And if we're not going to support and celebrate these guys trying to become better, then if football doesn't trailblaze a sustainability transition, I really don't know what else is going to be able to do that within the time frame that we need it to happen, to be perfectly honest. I think it's around using the culture of football, the language of football, the values of football, teamwork, respect, belief, no hope is not lost until the final whistle blows. I think it's, we've got a lot to learn from the game. Fans, football fans, traditionally we stereotype them, saying that they're thugs and they're hooligans. And that has been true in the past, but football fans are doctors, football fans are lawyers, football fans are really, really amazing people. They're farmers, they're parents, etc. And if we can work with the game in ways that not only is good for climate, but is good for the financial sustainability of the game, it increases participation and representation in the game, and it protects the future of the game, then we can approach this in a very intelligent and holistic way that's good for the planet, but also good for the sport. I think I'll make two last points because I know I'm rambling on. The first one, what was the first one? I think it's about approaching it with authenticity. Don't approach football fans and be like, as a consultancy and be like trying to hijack the game or use it as a Trojan horse to drive an agenda. They'll sniff you out straight away. If you understand football culture, then that's really, really important. But that also translates into different sectors, no matter what you're interested in. The other thing I will say is that, honestly, I swear to God, if Leicester can win the Premier League, we can avert the climate crisis 100%, because that was impossible.
I'd love to ask you all a question, which is any advice, actually, for people who are trying to get their message around the climate crisis or their environmental projects into the mainstream. And because you've all mentioned incredible projects, feel free to add on to the advice. It could be working with Football for Future or attending the Natural History Museum, but what advice would you give people really trying to get out into the mainstream? Elliot?
Really echo what Camilla said earlier on when she was talking around get no data, no facts, no stats. So let's do some storytelling, make it as relatable as possible. That's how you engage people. And I think also try and use something other than just climate, talking about climate, try and use some other type of cultural phenomenon as the vehicle for that, because then it's going to be more targeted and you're going to be specific with your framing to particular groups that you're trying to influence and particular communities that you're trying to influence. And I'd say as well, we suffer the consequences of our own imaginations. Shoot for the stars, be super ambitious, and if you land on Mars, you're still going to have a good time.
What a quote.